Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has told lawmakers that Israel carried out one of its heaviest bombardments in recent weeks, dropping what he said was 153 tons of bombs on Gaza on Sunday. Speaking before Israel's parliament, the Knesset, Netanyahu said the strikes were a direct response to what the military described as a ceasefire violation by Hamas. The Prime Minister's remarks came as questions mount over whether the fragile truce in Gaza can still hold. Yesterday, we saw Hamas blatantly violating the ceasefire agreement, Netanyahu told lawmakers, adding that 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in the incident. He named them as First Sergeant Itai Yavetz and Major Yaniv Kula, before pausing briefly as members of parliament stood in silence. To our sorrow, 2 fighters fell during the ceasefire, he said. Hamas immediately felt the weight of our arm. We attacked it with 153 tons of bombs. 153 tons of bombs. The figure, roughly 337,000 pounds of explosives, underscores the scale of the retaliation and has drawn new international scrutiny over Israel's use of air power inside the densely populated enclave. Israeli officials have said the targets were Hamas military positions and weapons depots in the central and northern parts of Gaza, but local civil defense teams and humanitarian agencies report extensive damage to residential blocks, shops, and public facilities. Medical sources in Gaza say dozens of casualties were brought to hospitals overnight, including women and children. Power outages and communication blackouts were reported across several neighborhoods following the airstrikes. The Israeli army said it acted after detecting rocket fire from Hamas units positioned near Khan Yunis, which it claimed breached the ceasefire terms agreed earlier this month. The military spokesperson described the strikes as precise and proportional, asserting that Israel remains committed to the truce but will respond forcefully to any aggression. Netanyahu's remarks mark a significant escalation in tone at a time when international mediators, including Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, are still trying to preserve the framework of the US-brokered ceasefire agreement known as Phase 2. Under that deal, Hamas was to maintain a full cessation of hostilities in exchange for a gradual Israeli withdrawal from parts of Gaza and the release of Palestinian detainees. Sunday's exchange threatens to derail that timetable. In Parliament, Netanyahu framed the latest strikes as both retribution and deterrence. He told lawmakers that Israel would not tolerate what he called testing the patience of the Israeli people. He insisted that Hamas bore sole responsibility for the renewed violence and warned that future violations would be met with an even stronger response. The Prime Minister's remarks were met with applause from members of his coalition, but drew immediate criticism from opposition figures who accused his government of undermining diplomatic efforts and risking a wider escalation. Yair Lapid, leader of the lled party, told reporters afterward that while Israel has the right to defend itself, the use of overwhelming force during a declared ceasefire could isolate the country internationally. He said, "Yes, we must act firmly, but also wisely. Every bomb dropped in Gaza during a truce costs us support in the world." International reaction was swift. The United Nations called for restraint, saying that the ceasefire must be respected by all sides. A UN spokesperson in New York said the Secretary General was deeply concerned by reports of new strikes and urged both parties to recommit to the agreed cessation of hostilities. In Washington, the White House National Security Council said it was monitoring the situation closely. A senior US official, speaking on background, reiterated that the ceasefire remains the best path toward lasting calm and warned that renewed hostilities could jeopardize humanitarian aid deliveries to Gaza. Egyptian and Qatari mediators, who have played central roles in maintaining communication between Israel and Hamas, have also been in contact with both sides since the incident. Egyptian state media quoted an unnamed diplomat as saying Cairo was concerned that continued military actions will collapse the fragile calm that has held for several weeks. Inside Gaza, residents described a night of fear and confusion. Videos posted on local networks showed powerful explosions lighting up the sky over Gaza City, followed by thick plumes of smoke. Civil defense units worked through the early hours to rescue people trapped under rubble. The Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas authorities, said hospitals were operating beyond capacity, with staff using backup generators amid electricity shortages. The ministry accused Israel of targeting densely populated areas, a claim Israeli officials denied. As the news of the strike spread, humanitarian organizations renewed appeals for protection of civilians. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it was gravely alarmed by the reports and reminded all parties that even in war, the principles of distinction and proportionality must be upheld. Netanyahu's speech also carried a domestic message. He used the address to emphasize his government's commitment to Israel's security and to reassure the public that the military remains in control. He said that the Israel Defense Forces were continuing to enforce the buffer zones inside Gaza and maintain surveillance along the border to prevent any infiltration attempts. Meanwhile, memorial ceremonies were held for the two soldiers Netanyahu mentioned by name. First Sergeant Itai Yavetz, aged 22, and Major Yaniv Kula, aged 31, were both part of the Givati Brigade operating near the central sector of the Gaza Strip. Israeli officials said they died after being struck by mortar fire launched from Hamas-controlled territory. The funerals, attended by military and political leaders, drew large crowds. Families and friends called them heroes who fell during a mission of peace. In a televised message later that evening, Israel's defense minister reaffirmed the government's stance, saying, "Our enemies should understand. Israel's response will always be decisive." Within Gaza, Hamas issued its own statement accusing Israel of fabricating pretexts to justify renewed bombings. It said the alleged ceasefire breach was a manufactured claim intended to derail talks on prisoner exchanges. The statement, released through the group's official media office, declared that any Israeli aggression would be met with resistance. It also accused Washington of giving Israel political cover to continue military operations despite the truce. Analysts say the latest confrontation exposes deep mistrust between the two sides. While the ceasefire technically remains in place, both are acting as though it could collapse at any moment. Military experts note that dropping 153 tons of ordnance in a single day represents one of the most concentrated uses of air power since the beginning of the year. The figure suggests dozens of precision-guided bombs, likely targeting command centers, tunnels, and weapons storage facilities. Still, international pressure is mounting. European Union officials called for maximum restraint and reiterated that all sides must adhere to international humanitarian law. The EU's foreign policy chief said the bloc would continue supporting mediation efforts led by the United States and regional partners. At the same time, Russia's foreign ministry condemned the airstrikes as disproportionate, while China urged both sides to return to dialogue. In neighboring Lebanon, where cross-border tensions remain high, Hezbollah issued a brief statement of solidarity with Hamas, accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire for political gain. Israeli military officials responded by increasing surveillance flights along the northern frontier. Despite the renewed fighting, diplomatic channels remain open. US envoy Steve Witkoff and senior advisor Jared Kushner are scheduled to meet Israeli officials in Jerusalem later this week to discuss the status of the ceasefire and broader regional security arrangements. The United States continues to describe the Gaza truce as part of a multi-phase roadmap aimed at reducing violence and paving the way for reconstruction. Phase 2, which includes gradual demilitarization of border zones and humanitarian aid expansion, is now under threat. For families in Gaza, however, such political terms offer little comfort. Residents interviewed by local media said they are struggling to rebuild lives repeatedly shattered by conflict. In one interview, a resident standing amid debris said simply, "We were told the war was over, but the bombs keep coming. As the day ends, smoke still lingers over parts of Gaza." Israeli aircraft remain active in the skies, while negotiators work behind the scenes to prevent the ceasefire from unraveling completely. Whether Sunday's bombardment marks an isolated reprisal or the beginning of a new escalation will depend largely on what happens next, on the ground, in the air, and in the negotiating rooms far from the front lines. For now, Netanyahu's message to both Parliament and Hamas is unmistakably clear. Israel will strike back whenever it believes the ceasefire has been broken, and it is prepared to do so with overwhelming force.